What is your roommate horror story? Prison was already the worst place I'd ever been, but I thought I'd found some kind of stability when they paired me with Marcus. I was doing pre-trial detention at this maximum security facility, one of those places where they throw everyone together regardless of what you're in for. You'd have kids who got caught with a baggie of weed bunking next to guys doing life for murder. The whole system was fucked, but that's another story. Marcus was this quiet guy from Detroit, maybe 35, in for some white-collar stuff involving his construction company. We clicked immediately. Both of us were readers, both trying to keep our heads down and get through this nightmare without losing our minds. The cell was tiny, 2 bunks, a steel toilet, and barely enough room for both of us to stand up at the same time. But we made it work. Marcus would read in the morning while I did push-ups, then we'd switch. We'd talk for hours about books, about our families, about how screwed up the whole justice system was. It was as close to civilized as you could get in that concrete hellhole. We had routines. Marcus would make coffee on our little commissary hot pot every morning at exactly 7 a.m. I'd organize our books and keep our small space clean. During the 1 hour we got out of the cell for recreation, we'd walk laps around the yard and talk about everything. History, politics, our different backgrounds. Marcus was from inner city Detroit. I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, but we found common ground in our shared misery and our determination to survive this intact. For 3 months, it worked. We respected each other's space, shared our commissary money when one of us was running low, and generally made an unbearable situation bearable. Then they brought in Tommy. Tommy was maybe 40, missing a few teeth, with these pale blue eyes that never seemed to focus on anything for more than a few seconds. He'd just gotten out after doing 18 years for second-degree murder and had lasted exactly 2 months on the outside before getting busted for armed robbery of a convenience store. The guards just shoved him into our cell without any explanation. Suddenly, our careful 2-person dynamic became a 3-way clusterfuck in a space barely big enough for 2 people. From day 1, Tommy was wrong. Not just prison crazy, which you expect after being locked up that long, but fundamentally broken in some way that made my skin crawl. He'd sit on his bunk. They brought in a third one that took up most of our floor space, muttering to himself for hours. Not just random mumbling, but entire conversations with people who weren't there. Sometimes he'd laugh at his invisible companions. Sometimes he'd get angry and start cursing at them. Marcus and I tried to be patient at first. Prison changes people, and Tommy had been inside for almost 2 decades. We figured he just needed time to adjust to having cellmates again. But then the paranoia started. Tommy became convinced that other inmates were talking about him, planning something against him. He'd spend hours during rec time just standing in the corner of the yard, watching everyone else with those dead fish eyes, taking notes in this little book he kept. "You see how Rodriguez looked at me today?" he'd ask when we got back to the cell. "That motherfucker is planning something. I can tell." Rodriguez was the 60-year-old grandfather doing time for tax evasion. The most threatening thing about him was his denture adhesive, but trying to reason with Tommy was impossible. Everything was a threat. Every conversation he couldn't hear was about him. Every glance from another inmate was a challenge. Then he started making weapons. I woke up one night to the sound of scraping metal. Tommy was sitting on his bunk, using a piece of concrete he'd somehow chipped off the wall to sharpen the handle of a plastic spoon into a point. He was completely absorbed in his work, humming some tune under his breath. "Tommy," I whispered. "What are you doing?" He looked up at me with this smile that made my blood freeze. "Just getting ready, brother. Can't be too careful in a place like this. You sent." Marcus was awake too. We locked eyes across the cell, both thinking the same thing. We were trapped in a 6x8 concrete box with someone who was completely unhinged. The next week was a nightmare. Tommy would stay up all night working on his collection of improvised knives, muttering about all the people who'd wronged him and how he was going to balance the scales. He'd hidden sharpened pieces of metal, plastic, and whatever else he could find all around our cell. Marcus and I started taking shifts sleeping. One of us would stay awake and alert while the other got a few hours of rest. We couldn't risk both of us being unconscious with Tommy and his arsenal 3 feet away. The guards either didn't notice or didn't care that our cell had become a powder keg. Tommy was smart enough to hide his weapons during inspections and put on a normal act when the COs were around. But we knew. We lived with the constant tension of wondering when Tommy's paranoid fantasies would finally push him over the edge and whether we'd be his targets when that happened. Prison was hell before Tommy showed up. With him there, it became something worse. A place where sleep meant potentially not waking up.